Okay, welcome back. This is episode 6 of the Bridge broadcast. I'm David Higbee, and I have a great friend here with us. This is Rakhi from Austin, Texas, and New Horizons Lacrosse. How's it going, Rakhi?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for jumping on a Saturday afternoon. We have a little bit more time on our hands lately, so This was a good opportunity to catch up and a good weekend to do so. Let's start with, we're in a pandemic. We're under quarantine. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I'm very privileged, and I'm recognizing that privilege deeply right now. Grateful to have a roof and food to eat and a job for now. So doing okay, getting a little antsy to get outside and just do my normal schedule, normal things. But yeah, okay, all things considering.
Good.
Yeah. How about you?
The same. I definitely have been very fortunate to still have a job and still have that security, access to the things that, I need to get by, my wife to get by. So yeah, certainly very, like you said, very privileged, and certainly learning about how this is affecting families that we know and people within our network that we know that are maybe don't have those sort of that sort of same access. So it's been good to recognize that we have certain privileges and certain access to things that others don't. So this outbreak and pandemic have certainly spotlighted a lot of the gaps that we talk about. This has certainly been very eye-opening, and just how large of a gap it really is.
Mm-hmm.
Are you starting to see some of those highlighted gaps in New Horizons and in Austin, just in general?
It doesn't feel like that different to me in terms of what I can see and what I perceive to be the case. I think the rest of the community is finally seeing a lot of the inequities that I think you and I probably see more closely, being on the ground and being in these communities day to day. So it's really interesting to see that. So I feel like a lot of people who are being really emotionally impacted by this, but not tangibly impacted, if you will.
Right.
I think it's because they're dealing with this like emotional burden for the first time, and I feel like we deal with that day to day. So that doesn't feel different, but it's very interesting to see how people are like sort of like growing this communal consciousness over like, hey, like this is like a real issue. We need to like go help the food bank out because there's like 2,000 cars lined up today. So I think that hopefully will lead to something good permanently that comes out of this.
Absolutely. We've talked a lot about just with our coaches and, just people that we're still in contact with of, after this all ends, like we now have a maybe greater awareness of those challenges that people face day to day. And maybe we're a little bit more aware of how to solve those problems down the line.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's those are the lessons learned from this. And we have just a better understanding of those individual challenges people have and families have.
For sure. I hope so too.
Yeah. It's fun to catch up with you because you and David Hamill were the last two people I saw before quarantine.
Okay.
You were the last people I've interacted with face to face before we went under lockdown. I was in Austin the Thursday before Dallas ISD spring break. So we don't have practices or games that Friday or that weekend because it was spring break. And then everything went into lockdown pretty much Sunday, Monday. Mm-hmm. And so, my last human interaction was you guys. So
wow.
and it feels so long ago that I was down there. Just so many things have happened obviously since then. But I was thinking about that earlier today. I was like, I think they're the last two people I saw and hung out with before all of this. Give us a little bit more kind of backstory of yourself.
Sure.
And then maybe kind of roll that into your connection with New Horizons and getting connected with David. And then we can kind of expand into NHL, which, by the way, I've realized you guys have taken on that acronym lately, which is cool.
Yeah.
So maybe you can kind of expand into NHL.
Yeah, it's a little confusing just because there is an NHL already, but we'll workshop it a little bit in the future. But yeah, so I am not from Texas. I'm from the East Coast originally. I grew up in Connecticut, where lacrosse is very big, and grew up in this like pretty normal middle class suburb of Connecticut, and did my thing, did school, was really into school as a kid, ended up going to Columbia in New York City for college. And of all the sports that I played growing up, I played soccer, basketball, volleyball. Lacrosse is definitely the one sport that I just felt the closest connection to, even though it wasn't the sport that I played the longest. So when I got there, I realized like, hey, Columbia's in the middle of New York City. There's no greenery anywhere around here. I'm almost never outside other than like walking from class to class and doing all the walking that you do in living in New York City. I want to be more active. I want to be active in a different way. So I sought out the lacrosse team at Columbia, reached out to the coach, and basically walked down as a goalie and ended up doing some managing and videoing for them as well when I was there. So was on the team for a couple of years. Realized that being a D1 athlete is a ton of time. I was not anticipating spending on lacrosse. It was a full-time job. So towards my end of sophomore year, junior year, left the team, did other stuff on campus, was really involved with extracurriculars, and then ended up graduating and realizing I didn't know what to do with my life, as many undergrads can probably relate to, and decided I wanted to go teach. So I moved to Chicago for a teaching program and ended up teaching around there for about a year. Realized I was over the cold weather, needed a change of scenery. So I just bought a one-way ticket and moved down to Austin. So when I was down in Austin, I taught down here for about 4 to 5 years. And I think it was almost exactly a year ago. I was on the website for this Central Texas Day of Giving. I know you guys have one up there as well. The one down here is called Amplify Austin. So every February and March, there's an annual 24-hour period where nonprofit organizations in town come together to raise money for themselves. Always raises like $10 million or more. So I always like to peruse the nonprofits that are on there.
Right.
Ever since leaving teaching, I've entered the nonprofit scene. So it's a fun thing to do as a nonprofit development person. So I was looking through the nonprofits and saw one that had lacrosse in the title, and I was shocked because I had not experienced anything lacrosse related down here in Austin whatsoever. Clicked on it, went to their website, and realized not only were they lacrosse focused, but they were focusing lacrosse on communities of color and low-income communities, which are the communities that I come from. So seemed perfect. Reached out to David immediately, and I was coaching within a couple weeks. Coached a team of 3 to 5th graders over at Overton Elementary, which is one of the public elementary schools down here in Austin, and told David basically like I wanted to do more. So he gave me more to do, and I became the director of fundraising and communication.
That's funny. And I think that's how most people get connected to organizations like ours, right? It's just a Google search or just kind of this random happenstance. For those of you who are listening, we've mentioned his name a couple of times, but David Hamill is the founding director, the founder of New Horizons. And I got connected with David years ago. I'd sort of, again, kind of randomly stumbled upon the website or the organization, reached out, and we actually didn't formally get connected until just last year when we had some of his kids come up to our summer academy. And so I've always known about New Horizons in Austin, but the connective tissue wasn't really being built until a little less than a year ago, about maybe this time a year ago. So David is a great guy. He has kind of passed the baton to Rakhi in terms of this podcast. I reached out to him and he was like, maybe have Rakhi do it. I think she'd be better fit. Let's talk about just the organization as a whole, right? And sort of the day-to-day operations or the programming of New Horizons. What was the current programming calendar like for New Horizons?
Sure. So we're definitely a few years behind Bridge in terms of development of programming. So we were simply focused on really building out the lacrosse portion of our program this year. We had 2 teams over at Martin Middle School, Title I Middle School here in Austin. We had about 25 to 30 kids total between the 2 teams. And we were holding practices twice a week. We had multiple games on the schedule. We were trying to organize some girls scrimmages and also some community play days towards the end of the season, which obviously will not be happening now. But we were really just trying to solidify our team and then our strategy moving forward in terms of how we were gonna increase access for all kids on the east side of Austin versus just a small little portion.
Yeah. And so when I was down in Austin, we had talked a little bit about, we've talked in the past about that move from sort of school-based to community-based.
Yeah.
What are some things you guys are planning for in terms of making that transition?
So I think the 2 biggest things are the relationships and the resources, right? So David obviously is the founder and executive director of New Horizons, and he has been in this one middle school that we practice at, Martin Middle School, for probably at least the past 5 years in terms of building relationships on the ground. The principal knows his work. He knows the PE coaches, the teachers know of him, front office staff know of him. So there's just been a lot of foundation laid in terms of helping them see the value of lacrosse programming and adding another sport that isn't run internally by the school. So that is definitely a concern, is if we move away from a school-based model, are other schools going to as easily understand the value that New Horizons brings? Are we going to have that same depth of relationships that helps us recruit students or helps us get school resources or funding when we need to? And that brings me to my second point, is just the resources part. So Martin is right on Lady Bird Lake, Town Lake, very nice fields in the back, has Austin Parks and Rec fields in the back that we sometimes play on based on a reciprocal relationship. They provide us with buses, they provide our students with snacks, they provide us with the PE coaches that then become the trainers for our games. So there's just a lot of resources that the district provides through the school that we could conceivably lose if we move to a community-based model. But I think what we've decided on as a team or as a leadership team is that the pros to having more kids and having a critical mass of kids play outweigh the cons for the short term, at least.
Right.
Yeah.
When we made that move to community-based, we had a lot of those concerns about the relationships and kind of starting over in a lot of ways. We weren't necessarily getting some of the same resources that you all were. And so a lot of that for us wasn't necessarily in question, but the relationships is a big part of it. You know, we'd been in a lot of the schools we were at. We were 3 major schools for almost a decade, and some of them more than a decade in 1 or 2 of them. And so, it's definitely tough to make that transition, and making sure you do it in a way that's respectful and it doesn't look like, hey, we're just going to we're out of here. And especially when you're getting significant resources to maintain that programming. One of the things that's been big for us is culture, and we really emphasize culture in making that move to community-based. What are some challenges for you guys in moving the culture away from Martin Middle School to New Horizons Lacrosse?
Yeah. So in terms of the kids that are on the team right now, that's all they know, right? So they aren't students that participate in any sort of community-based teams right now. If we have a couple, they are participating on travel teams or higher level teams for other sports. So I think being able to separate, hey, this is not just your team now, there's going to be other kids from other schools on this team. We have to be more inclusive and build those relationships internally as a team is going to be a shift. Branding wise, we've always just been Martin Lacrosse. So that's going to be a shift as well. And then honestly, we're still building out the culture, the external facing culture for students and through the programming. So I think this is actually a good time to make the shift to community-based. We, in this past year, we've grown our leadership team quite a bit. And with that has come more refinement of what practices look like and how to make that consistent of an experience for students. We always start and end with the closing circle, really making sure that we're developing those parent relationships, and that parents understand that even though we're not based necessarily just at their school anymore, that we still very much want them to come with us.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. We were actually pretty concerned that we would lose kids in that process, and that there would be a little bit of a drop off, and we'd have to kind of rebuild. But, the feedback we got, and hopefully that you all will get, assume you guys will get, it will strengthen people's commitment to the organization. We definitely struggled in the idea of making that move and, maybe upsetting kind of those relationships, but it actually turned out to work in our favor in a lot of ways in terms of meeting the goals that we wanted and making that move. So it's certainly stressful, and it comes with some unknowns, but for us in the long term, and even, some of the short-term stuff we talked about, it worked out very well.
Yeah.
Let's talk about branding of going to community-based. What are some things internally that you all want to get done, strategically want to get done?
For sure. So for going to community-based, I think our number one priority is just making sure that we are keeping our current kids and families in mind as much as possible. I think we talked about this when you were here last time. We don't want to lose. We want to avoid losing kids if we can. So if it's coming down to a transportation issue, we find a new field that's not affiliated with Martin, where we're going to hold practices, but a couple kids can't get there, we're going to try to figure out some sort of stopgap to help them still participate. The best way to do that, I think, for us right now is going to be to try to engage Martin as a partner in this move and see if we can still use a lot of their support, but just change the branding, which shouldn't really be an issue if we're still majority kids for Martin, but that's a conversation that hasn't been had yet. So that needs to be had. But regardless of whether we stay where we are physically or we move to a different space in town, having kids be able to get there easily. Second thing would be just like proximity to other schools that we want to engage. So our bread and butter is our middle school teams. We haven't really sustainably expanded to elementary school or high school yet, although we would like to in the future. So engaging the other Title I middle schools on the east side and like trying to find a place that's geographically in between them would be really helpful. What else? Community-based. I mean, you would know better than we would, really, in terms of the things that I'm not thinking of. But I feel like transportation and space are the biggest, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting because we have such different challenges. And I think that was one thing that was really spotlighted when I came down to visit was some of the things you guys deal with are significantly more challenging than things we deal with. And I think that's the whole for all urban-based lacrosse nonprofits, right? The makeup of any city presents different challenges for nonprofits like us. And so Austin, I think you all definitely have a transportation issue. There's a proximity issue. Yep. We don't have that issue necessarily because of the demographic we're pulling in has some access to transportation.
Sure.
And not in every aspect, but it's not something that we're able to provide. But for you all, transportation seems to be one of the larger challenges, or proximity seems to be one of the larger challenges.
Yeah, there isn't good public transportation here. So
right.
The east side, when we say the east side of Austin, we really just mean east of 35, which is a very large area. In the poverty and the low income phenomena that like affect the east side range from very north Austin to very south Austin. So we need to be a little bit more specific in terms of, okay, we say East Austin, but we mean between like the lake and 290 or something like that. So
right.
we need to hone that down some more before we officially make that move.
Yeah. And so in addition to transportation and proximity, what are some other challenges that your kids at Martin face? You know, we have such a wide diversity and spectrum of socioeconomic backgrounds that sometimes it's hard to kind of pinpoint some of the exact needs of certain families or certain neighborhoods.
Yeah.
For you all being a little bit more hyper-focused in a school or neighborhood, what are some of the unique challenges at Martin?
So Martin specifically is a school within AISD that's, I would say, struggling academically. So there's a lot of changes and turnover that happens within the school, both with the staff and teachers, but also with kids. So we've had multiple kids, even this year, who started off on the team with us and then moved away, or who like joined the team that last practice before spring break that you were at. That was their first practice. They came
right.
But now who knows if they'll still be here 3 months from now when this is over. It's a very transitional community. The reasons being those community members are being pushed out due to the gentrification that's happening on the east side, specifically around Martin. They're building a giant complex right across the street. So that's definitely one barrier that we have, or one thing that we have to consider. Second thing is our kids are very clearly food insecure, financially insecure. We've started incorporating like nutrition and food and snacks and stuff into our programming just because we don't want that to be a barrier for kids participating. And it's very apparent that like some kids will like take entire backpacks full of snacks, or like will run extra laps just so they can get an extra bag of fruit snacks.
Yeah.
And that's not normal behavior, I'm sure, in terms of a healthy, prospering community. So that's something that we have to keep in mind too. And that obviously just comes down to funding restrictions, like how much money can we raise for things that aren't our bread and butter, which is like lacrosse equipment and field fees and things like that. And then the third would just be, I guess, like the language cultural barriers. So we have a pretty diverse team in the sense that it's not homogenous. We have a large Latinx population student-wise, but we also have a decent number, for Austin at least, of Black students and a couple white students as well. But there, with the Latinx families, there is, some of them are undocumented, some of them don't speak any English. So when we make phone calls to parents, it's either I speak Spanish, thankfully, but if we don't have enough people who speak Spanish at the leadership level to really make those calls and build those relationships beyond a transactional, like, hey, drop your kid off at this time at this place type of communication, which then obviously hurts our long-term sustainability and longevity in terms of really being able to keep those parents engaged in a more meaningful way and understanding their needs in a more meaningful way. So these are just some of the things that we're dealing with, but I know you guys have different issues.
Our biggest challenge really is that Dallas County is just really, poverty is the biggest issue. Violence and teen pregnancy, gang-related activities, those are obviously present in Dallas, but they're not necessarily things that we deal with or that we see on a regular basis. It really just comes from kids who just don't have access to certain things and resources for certain things. And so the consequences of those manifest itself differently than something like teen pregnancy or gang violence. And so it's hard to really pinpoint, what we're looking at. Yeah, it is. It's certainly more subtle. And
correct me if I'm wrong though, you guys are structured very similarly to us in the sense that like your program by design is sort of built to eliminate those poverty-based barriers, right? In terms of providing kids with equipment, not waiving the fee if they need to, things like that, right?
Yeah, certainly. A kid can come in our program completely free. The challenges might be mom and dad having to drive or getting their own cleats somehow. But for the most part, we try to provide as much support as we can. And yeah, we waive, most of our kids are scholarship. We provide all the equipment. We're very fortunate to have a pretty solid inventory of equipment. So equipment's not a need, or not a challenge. So yeah, that's been good. So we definitely alleviate a lot of the barriers of entry for lacrosse, which I think the challenge in getting, some of those kids into our system though, is the proximity, is the transportation. Sometimes it's also cultural, where there is a cultural barrier of, I don't play this sport. This sport is not prevalent in my neighborhood. So why bother? There's not scholarship money. There's not a pro career in it. That's maybe some families are looking at versus, in comparison to other sports. Yeah. So we have some cultural barriers that we deal with. Mm-hmm. I imagine certainly you guys have the same issues that. Yeah.
And we've struggled, and we've struggled with recruitment and retention actually, which are, it's sort of like we're burning both ends of the rope at the same time. Mm-hmm. But I think recruitment wise, it's been a lot of the same issues in terms of the community and families not being familiar with the sport. Soccer is obviously the default winner in most of Austin. So that's the community sport. That's the sport that dads can play and children can play. It's the sport that you'll drive by on a Saturday morning and see the fields occupied with. So that, then also just not understanding the cost behind it long term, not understanding like where they can go, right? It's not a UIL sport. It's not, like you said, there's not money necessarily in it, even if they go pro. So why bother? And also, I think, honestly, the UIL thing is probably bigger than we think, or we realize on a day-to-day basis, just because like with UIL sports, even if the child's not planning on going pro, at least the school is behind it, right? So it counts for the school in some way, which again goes back to this whole school-based, community-based thing.
And that's something that we've struggled with. There's a lot, there are people pushing for sanctioning of the sport in Texas via UIL. It's not something that we get into a lot. It's sort of a little bit outside of our realm because our mission is so different. But I understand that the gravitas of being a UIL sport is different than being a club sport like lacrosse is in the state of Texas. And I don't know how you all function between sort of the fun side of sports and the competitive side. How do you work that balance out? That's been a challenge for us.
Yeah, it's been a challenge for us too. I think we're still figuring it out. Like this has been our I feel like our first real season in terms of having a large enough team where we have some people that are multi-sport athletes and then some kids who, this is going to be their only sport if they even continue. And we're trying to keep them engaged in that way. But I think at the end of the day, it's a mix, right? It's a balance. So we are focusing a lot on skill development, and that way students can measure their progress and success with themselves. So, hey, you couldn't pass yesterday, but you can catch now today, or your ground balls are looking much better today than they did last week. So that type of positive feedback, I think, is keeping the focus on improvement and growth. And then the fun is just coming through games and through the culture that we're trying to build on the team.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, and this kind of goes back to how you got involved with New Horizons. So your background now is in nonprofit, a fundraising aspect. What are your thoughts on how does COVID change the nonprofit realm? What are we seeing from a funding standpoint, organizational standpoint, as we make it through this pandemic and on the other side?
Yeah. So I'm honestly really worried for nonprofits and just like nonprofit scene in general, especially here in Austin. I don't know if we've talked about this, but Austin has more nonprofits per capita than any other city in the country.
I did not know that actually.
Yeah, like 8,000 plus for our population of like 1 million, which is ridiculous. I could get down into that, my whole thought process about that and why that's the case. But I'm worried for nonprofits because I don't know if the philanthropic giving that foundations, family foundations, even the larger foundations are going to be upping is going to meet the need. I also think it's a great chance, and it's going to force a lot of nonprofits to stop being complacent in terms of the work that they're doing. as you know, there's nonprofits for everything, right? There's not just
Yeah.
for giving people food and clothing and shelter. There's nonprofits that are then in charge of other nonprofits, and they're just
Right.
a very complex world. I think the nonprofits that are going to be hurting the most are going to be the small local community-based nonprofits where there's only a couple staff members, if that. They have a budget of less than $100,000, maybe a couple $100,000, and they don't have the people in their back pocket who they can call up and get write a $10,000 check to pay payroll for the next 2 months. So I'm worried about them. I also wonder if some nonprofits are simply just going to pause their programming given COVID, or I'm interested to see how many nonprofits pivot and how many just decide, hey, this is like not our time, and we're just going to take a hiatus.
Right.
I'm wondering if there's going to be some consolidation or partnership really in the sphere to really make sure that we're addressing basic needs, and then figure out after basic needs what needs to exist, what was truly functioning well and adding value before all of this, and what is going to continue to add value after this.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about you?
And we're definitely going to see that in Dallas as well.
Yeah.
Of the nonprofits that are, fulfilling, basic needs.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the ones that obviously need the funding right now, and they need the resources. What happens after this, is definitely kind of in the air. And a lot of nonprofits like us, we're just not really sure. We're very fortunate to have, generous donors and supporters. But our runway, like a lot of nonprofits, is always in question. We've always been a little hand to mouth. Like you said earlier, like it'll give nonprofits like us an opportunity to really evaluate, what needs that we're filling. Mm-hmm. And if we need to be creative and looking for alternatives, like partnering with organizations, some sort of collaboration, merging, whatever it may be. After 2008 and the depression or recession in 2008, you kind of saw a little bit of that consolidation. You saw the reevaluation of giving and reevaluation of how program needs are met. And so there was some creativity in that. A friend of mine in Houston ran into a woman. She was an attorney by trade, pretty high up in like the giving circles. But basically after 2008 and with money tightening up, when you send us your grant application, I'm going to come through, and if I say you're done, you're done. Like, I'm going to give you unsolicited advice of you don't need to exist, because I've looked at 10 other nonprofits just like you.
Yeah.
You're just duplicating what's already being done in this neighborhood, and they're doing it better with better metrics, better funding. I think some nonprofits did take it to heart and say, we really do need to look at what's best for the challenges that we're trying to meet. And sometimes that's not existing, right? Or that's, kind of putting our egos aside.
I completely agree. Especially with Austin and like the overabundance of nonprofits here, there's bound to be duplication or bound to be opportunities for partnership and merging and whatnot. And I just don't understand. I mean, I think it just comes down to ego, if I'm being honest.
I totally agree.
Like maybe it's Austin with the tech scene, like people wanting to have a founder, like the founder complex or whatever. But like I want to build this from scratch. It's my thing. Like I have control, I have the power. But that's not what a nonprofit is, right? Like that's not the point of a nonprofit. The point of a nonprofit is to serve others and to like to not profit from it personally. So I've never understood the redundancy in a lot of missions.
The nonprofit realm is going to change. And I think hopefully for the better. And I think, you see the people talk about like, we can't go back to normal, right? There are too many, like you said earlier, inequities that need to be addressed in the right way when we get out of this. And I think for the nonprofit industry, we've got to find a way to continue to do things at a high level, efficiently, and with the people that we serve, their needs in mind. What's some of the silver lining, or what are some of the things that you all are looking forward to post-COVID?
I think really moving like that transition from school-based to community-based, we were going to do a lot of foundational work for that this summer, but that seems like it's not going to happen just because I don't even know if schools are going to be open in the fall, honestly.
Yeah.
So I don't think this is the right time to start having those conversations or engaging people in the city to brainstorm spaces and lighting and transportation and all those different pieces that need to be pulled together. I think just getting back on the field and having normal practices will feel like such a big win, because we've done it for this entire year now at this point, since like November, I guess, is when we did fall ball, but it doesn't feel routinized yet, right? So it doesn't feel consistent for the kids or for us, because we've gotten new coaches this year, etc. So I think just if we can get out there in the fall at all, like a small fall ball program, and then have a full spring season, I think that will be a huge win for us.
Yeah. Are you finding ways to stay engaged with your kids right now?
Yeah. So we have an after school program called ACE at Martin. So our PE coach basically tapped us to do like morning practices once a week. So we just had our first one this past week. So Johnny, you didn't meet Johnny, he wasn't there, right?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So Johnny Morrow, who's the head coach for our boys team, he led it. I didn't get to be on the call, unfortunately, but apparently they just they talked through life, and then they did a couple drill type things. Some kids though, were in their homes, in a corner, holed up, versus some kids were outside, right? So
yeah,
some inconsistencies there as well. I also don't know how many of our kids actually have internet, how many of our kids actually have devices.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to get that information at this point, because they have to have a device in order for us to communicate with them.
Right.
So there's just a lot of issues there to work out, but I'm glad that if we're able to get some of them together to at least say hi for a little bit. What about you?
Yeah, kind of the same thing. We've reached out, obviously virtually, for a lot of our kids. We kind of on the spot made up what we call Bridge Prep, which is just a fancy name for here's a workout routine, here's some wall ball drills. But we try to kind of keep it in some structure so that the kids have some sense of normalcy or some continuity within Bridge. And so every week I'll put out a wall ball routine for the different teams, a workout routine, some game film, or just some fun YouTube videos, right? Like a mini doc about a girls team or a boys team, highlight reels, things like that. We haven't quite gotten to this space, but this has kind of been a nice intro. But we put out some of the Headspace videos about mindfulness and meditation.
Yeah.
And then we do weekly Zoom calls. So we do it twice a week for our high school kids. And then we've been doing one, I think every youth team has had at least one. We did a virtual goalie clinic, which was pretty fun.
Did not.
That was really fun. We had two of our goalie coaches do that. I think we had 9 kids show up for that, which was, wow. I was shocked, but they enjoyed that. And then over the next couple of weeks, we're working on getting some alumni back. Actually, we've had some alumni drop in, and then we're going to have some pro players come in to some of our Zoom calls too. So yeah, so that's been fun. Yeah. So we've got Trevor Baptiste in a week and a half. And then Taylor Thornton, her and I have been texting back and forth about getting her to do a Zoom call with our high school kids or middle school girls.
How do you know them?
So PLL has the PLL Assist program, and we're a member, sort of a benefactor, or beneficiary rather, of the PLL Assist program. Yeah, I have a weekly standing call with Kyle Harrison. The college kid in me is just this is the greatest thing. I have a standing call with the GOAT.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and he's a great guy. He's really nice, and he wants to help us out as much as they can. The PLL can. Taylor's a Dallas native. She played at Hockaday before going off to Northwestern and just obviously having a dominant career in college and in the pros. Mm-hmm. She's come back to Dallas a couple times, and we've been able to connect with her, and she's done 2 clinics for us, one in the fall and one earlier this spring. So
that's incredible. You're doing
the Zoom. It's and part of it is, I have to do something, right?
Yeah, that kind of,
yeah. The other thing that we've been doing that's been kind of fun, just dropping off equipment to kids, right? I dropped off a goal. I'm trying to get a rebounder to one of our high school girls, just extra sticks for mom and dad, extra balls for the backyard. We're trying to do stick trick videos and things like that. Just little things that we can kind of keep the kids, again, somewhat in routine with lacrosse or familiar with lacrosse still. That's about it. But yeah, it's been tough, and the Zoom calls attendance are, they're kind of dipping the more and more we get into it. My hope is that kids can continue having access to our calls when they can. But, at some point we've got to get out of this and get back to being on the field, because virtual lacrosse can only go so far.
Yeah. What are your plans for summer academy or pivoting that?
It's a good question. Right now, I just don't know. I would like to host it. I would like to host Summer Academy. Mm-hmm. The challenge will be the safety aspect of putting 60, 70 kids in dorms, on a bus, everything like that. So right now it's in question. We'll kind of reassess at the end of, or kind of closer to May. Luckily, Summer Academy, because we've done it for 2 years, it has a template.
Sure.
And so it should be easy, to kind of pull off if everything looks safe and we can keep their well-being in mind. So I don't know. I wish I had a really for sure answer, but unfortunately all of our summer programming is in question. and we planned on doing more than we'd ever done before and things like that. So I'll keep you and Houston up to date on Summer Academy, because, we wanted to just have the biggest year yet, and have you up there too, obviously.
Yeah, I really want to experience it myself.
It's one of our marquee events without a doubt. And yeah, not having it just like hurts my soul.
Yeah.
It is such a special event. And we, our middle school kids have already asked me, Coach, like, what's going on with Summer Academy? Are we going to do it? And yeah, I don't know what to say. I don't have a timeline. So
are you loaning kids equipment, or are you giving them equipment?
We're just giving them equipment, except for my goals. I need the goals back.
Okay.
But yeah, if kids need extra sticks, lacrosse balls, mesh, we've got ladders and some sleds. For the most part, we're just going to give it to them. I tell the kids all the time, like, everything in the locker, it belongs to you guys. So, if you want an extra head or stick or whatever it may be, or extra shoulder pads, it's all yours.
I love that. What about the rebounders? Are you getting one per kid, or like?
Yeah, the rebounders are much more difficult. We've loaned out probably 4 or 5. We're trying to collect as many as we can. So we've reached out to a handful of donors who have kids or have had a rebounder, to see if they'd be willing to, let us borrow it or donate. But because they're also under quarantine, their kids are using it. So they're a little harder to come by. I actually picked one up yesterday that needs a little repairing, so I'll do that this weekend. But we may start to do some fundraising around some of those things. I have a waiting list of about 5 kids who want a rebounder or a goal, and we just don't have them. So, but we've been able to loan out the vast majority of stuff. Gets me out of the house, and I run up to the porch, drop it off, run back, keep that social distancing in mind. It's definitely tough for a lot of our kids, but I think for the most part, they're just bored.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing we're coming away with is, obviously a lot of families have challenges and there's certain needs that aren't being met, but in a lot of ways, Bridge, we're not that first responder type organization, right? So if there's food access needs, our families are going to other resources. We're not necessarily that resource for them. Yeah. We're just not in a position, we're not going around handing out food and masks, and, we're not a healthcare organization, things like that. But we want to certainly be present and available to our kids when we need them or when they need us.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you want to say anything to your kids who might be listening?
None of our kids are listening. But...
Oh, no. Okay. Yeah. Again, podcasting for middle school kids is not.
Not the preferred medium. I'm trying to think if I have anything else to say, but... I mean, yeah, just letting people know up there that we exist down here. We're trying to be the Bridge of Austin. So if you want to come help us out with any of that, let us know.
Absolutely. I appreciate you doing this. I appreciate your time. This is really fun. I really do appreciate it.
Of course, anytime.